In the United States, the majority of women in prison have experienced physical or sexual violence. A number of those women are domestic violence survivors.
I was criminalized for defending my life.
Those in power are doing their own abusive behavior in a different way.
What I didn't need was to be sent away to a prison and be forgotten about by a society that failed me in the first place.
Every year in the United States, roughly 10 million people are abused by an intimate partner. The CDC defines intimate partner violence as abuse or aggression that occurs in a romantic relationship. This can be a past or current relationship, and the abuse can take several forms, from stalking to emotional manipulation to physical or sexual violence.
Abusive persons are in need of power and control, and that manifests in many different ways.
This is Ruth Glynn, a survivor and the CEO and president of the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She says an abuser's efforts to exert power and control can range from restricting finances to isolating a person from their friends and family to threatening and inflicting violence.
This doesn't happen the day you meet this person. The day you meet this person, you think everything's going to be okay.
These controlling behaviors are often misunderstood by people who haven't experienced intimate partner violence, including those in the criminal legal system.
The first thing that people say, well, why don't you leave? And to me, that's ignorance because, they weren't trauma informed to know that oftentimes you can't leave. The person has become your sole provider. The person has messed you up mentally to where you just stuck.
This is Leah Faria. She's a survivor of domestic violence and the director of community liaisons and organizing at the Women's Community Justice Association. She served 21 years in prison for what she describes as defending her life against a man who physically assaulted her, triggering the years of abuse she had previously endured.
For me, I didn't think a safe option was to call 911. You're dealing with people who are not trauma-informed.
Faria's fear of calling the police is common. The National Domestic Violence Hotline found in a 2021 survey that 92% of victims felt afraid or concerned about how law enforcement would react if called, and 39% felt less safe after calling the police.
One of the ways in which domestic violence survivors are criminalized is through the inability and or lack of training, particularly first responders who respond to domestic violence events, not understanding who the primary aggressor is. And then before you know it, the survivor may have been the one that is charged with that domestic violence and has to go through that process.
This practice is particularly common because of mandatory arrest laws, which exist in more than a dozen states and require police officers to arrest one of the involved parties when they respond to a domestic violence call.
The first time I had to call the police, the night of the incident, they just confirmed my worst suspicion, that I wasn't given the benefit of the doubt, that I was arrested.
This is Tracy McCarter, a Manhattan-based nurse who ended up fatally stabbing her estranged husband in what she says was an attempt to protect her own life after years of violent abuse.
I was arrested within minutes of them entering my home, without them asking a lot of questions, without them finding out that that was my home and that my estranged husband came to my home, even though a neighbor was telling them that he heard me yelling, "Get out, get out." I was the one arrested.
Arresting a victim for fighting back against their abuser is one of the most common ways survivors of domestic violence are criminalized. Other forms of criminalization include charging victims for failure to protect their children from witnessing or experiencing abuse, engaging in illegal activity under the threat of violence from their abuser, or threatening physical force against their abuser. When it comes to the criminalization of domestic violence survivors, Black and brown women are disproportionately arrested and incarcerated. Glynn says that first responders need to be better trained to respond to domestic violence calls.
Every police officer, every EMT, anyone that's doing a first response should have training, what we call DV 101, which is the dynamics of domestic violence.
McCarter argues that being able to identify domestic violence isn't the problem.
In my case, the police have ample evidence that I was subjected to abuse. They have in my husband's own writings his apologies to me for choking me, punching me, kicking me. I provided a video to them because I thought they just don't understand. That's all. The ADA comes to court, and in response to the video, she says that at some point it appears that my husband may have choked me, but it would have been for a brief time. And I thought at that point, it doesn't matter. They know I'm a victim of domestic violence. That's not what they're interested in. The only way that I was going to be a victim in their eyes if I was the one who ended up dead.
Survivors and advocates describe going through the criminal legal system after surviving intimate partner violence as another form of abuse.
I pretty much knew, like right off the bat, that the detectives were able to detect that I was somebody that was abused. And instead of providing me with some kind of support, they pretty much harbored on that, which honestly further re-traumatized me.
This system, it doesn't have a place for us. It can't be reformed. It only needs to be destroyed. And then let's build something that's community-based, that allows people freedom, that allows people to heal.
From a policy perspective, there is so much more we can be doing. Yes, we've moved in a lot of good ways, but we still have gaps in resources.
Those gaps in resources can look like limited availability in transitional housing for survivors, or a lack of funding for intervention and prevention programs. Still, some states like California have made policy strides, enacting legislation that expands legal protections for survivors who have been criminalized. But Glenn says there also needs to be a shift in culture.
From a public relations and public awareness perspective, we don't do enough of just having these very public conversations about what domestic violence is and what is our part in it.
Why aren't we offering to set you up in housing, safe housing, away from that abusive situation? Why aren't we offering childcare to people who find themselves stuck? Why aren't we allocating money that is spent on policing to actually keeping people safe and protected in their communities prior to these interactions getting to that point?
Change is a movement. Right? Change is created by people who have a desire to see things differently. And if we really want to get to like public safety, we really want to get to a lower recidivism rate, if we really want to get to a better society, we have to work together, and we have to do it, in unison, and we just have to just do it.